There's a strange kind of fatigue that doesn't come from physical effort, but from excess. Not from running or lifting or laboring, but from the endless noise that surrounds us, and the noise we create inside ourselves. It's the fatigue of constantly explaining, defending, proving, and justifying a self that is already dissolving in the crowd. Every sentence we craft to be understood becomes another thread, pulling us further from who we are. We speak, again and again, to make sure the world knows our reasons, our worth, our truth. Yet the more we speak, the less we are. Our words scatter our essence like dust caught in the wind, fragments of meaning drifting away until nothing solid remains. Look around. The world hums with motion and chatter. City streets, digital screens, social feeds filled with arguments and affirmations. We scroll and respond, trying to prove that we matter, that we exist. We have mistaken noise for connection, constant reaction for relationship, and in that confusion, we've become unable to endure silence. The mind, addicted to the rhythm of attention, begins to fear stillness as if quiet were a void to be filled rather than a space to be inhabited. So we keep talking, keep explaining, keep broadcasting a version of ourselves that becomes thinner each time it's repeated. The Stoics warned us about this centuries ago. Zeno of Citium taught that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, a proportion designed by nature to remind us that wisdom begins in listening. Yet modern life has reversed that order. We speak twice as much and listen half as deeply. Cleanthes wrote that words should be weighed, not counted. But now we count every view, every comment, every echo of validation. The ancient discipline of silence, what the Stoics called sophrosyne, the temperance of speech, has been replaced by a compulsion to explain everything, even what needs no explanation at all. Neuroscience reveals what the Stoics intuited. When we live in constant stimulation, the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain that governs clarity, focus, and reason, begins to shut down. In its place, the amygdala takes control, reacting instead of reflecting. The more we talk, the less we think. The more we defend, the less we understand. Each explanation floods the brain with dopamine for a brief illusion of connection, followed by the emptiness of disconnection once it fades. We become trapped in cycles of self-justification, addicted to our own narrative noise. This is why silence feels so foreign, because silence demands presence, and presence demands honesty. When the external noise fades, the inner one grows louder. We hear our fears, our doubts, the fragile architecture of our identity. That's why we run back to words, because explaining feels safer than listening to the truth within us. But the ancients knew what is suppressed in noise is revealed in quiet. Seneca once wrote, "Speech is the mirror of the mind." Yet in constant talking, the mirror shatters. Silence, then, is the act of gathering the pieces. To stop explaining is not to reject others. It is to return to yourself. It's the moment when you stop trying to be understood and begin to understand. It's the transition from needing to be seen to learning to see. In silence, the mind recalibrates. Neurons fire differently. The nervous system finds coherence again. Modern studies show that even 2 minutes of silence lowers blood pressure, balances serotonin, and restores the rhythm of the vagus nerve. Silence is not an absence. It's a recalibration. The nervous system remembering its natural state of order. There comes a point when words lose their meaning, when every argument, every explanation, every justification becomes a closed loop leading nowhere. And in that moment, if you're brave enough to stop speaking, something else begins. The mind exhales, the noise withdraws, and what remains is not emptiness, but space. A clarity that cannot be explained, only experienced. The stillness you once feared becomes your teacher. The silence you once avoided becomes your strength. Because there is a language beneath words, a voice beyond sound. It speaks only when everything else is quiet. It tells you what no explanation ever could, that you are not what you say, but what you choose to become when no one is watching, when no one is listening, when no one demands an answer. The Stoics called it harmony with nature. Neuroscience calls it homeostasis. You can call it peace, But whatever name you give it, remember this: the world will keep asking you to explain yourself. Let it ask. Your silence will say more than words ever could. There is a silence that is not emptiness but structure. It is the discipline of a mind that has stopped scattering itself through constant explanation and learned to hold its shape. The Stoics called this apatheia. Not apathy, but freedom from the passions that pull us away from reason. It is not the cold detachment of indifference, but the calm composure of mastery. It's the state of being fully alive yet unshaken, fully feeling yet not enslaved by what is felt. To reach it, one must learn to listen, not to others first, but to the self beneath all noise. Silence, in its highest form, is not withdrawal from life. It is participation in it with precision. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. A disciplined silence is the art of choosing those thoughts carefully before they become words, before they become actions, before they shape who we are. This restraint is not a prison, it's architecture. Just as a sculptor carves away the unnecessary to reveal the form within the marble, silence carves away the unessential until only the truth remains. Modern neuroscience now gives words to what the ancients practiced intuitively. When the mind quiets, activity in the prefrontal cortex, the region responsible for decision-making, focus, and emotional regulation, strengthens. Meanwhile, the amygdala, which governs fear and reactivity, softens its grip. The result is clarity. In the still mind, signals travel more efficiently. Cortisol levels drop, attention sharpens. Silence is not just spiritual, it is biological discipline. Every moment of quiet reorganizes the neural pathways that determine how we think, feel, and respond. It's the science of serenity. Seneca once said that, "He who does not rule his tongue will soon be ruled by it." The mind follows the same law. The more we speak without awareness, the more we become servants of our own impulses. But when we withhold the reflex to explain, something remarkable occurs. Space opens between stimulus and response. Within that space lies the freedom Epictetus described, the power to choose our reaction. That power is not loud, not dramatic, not visible. It's quiet, deliberate, and deeply human. Every act of silence is a small act of rebellion against the chaos of the world. It's the refusal to let noise dictate your inner state. It's the conscious decision to remain grounded even when surrounded by confusion, criticism, or misunderstanding. This is not retreat, it is strength. The kind of strength that Musonius Rufus believed to be the foundation of all virtue. The ability to endure without complaint, to stand firm without justification. Silence, when chosen, is not absence. It's presence, distilled to its purest form. In a society addicted to reaction, discipline begins where reactivity ends. The Stoic learns to hold his words the way a warrior holds his sword, unsheathed only when necessary, guided by intention, never by impulse. The discipline of silence teaches that not every thought deserves a voice, not every feeling requires a witness, not every attack needs a defense. Neuroscience confirms this truth. When we resist the urge to respond immediately, we strengthen the circuits of patience and executive control. The brain becomes an instrument tuned to clarity rather than noise. There's a sacred rhythm to restraint. In quiet moments, neurotransmitters like serotonin and GABA increase, producing a sense of balance and groundedness. The mind, no longer hijacked by external stimulation, begins to restore its baseline, the homeostasis from which insight emerges. Joe Dispenza calls this coherence. When the brain and heart move in sync, thoughts become precise, emotions become stable, and presence becomes effortless. In that coherence, silence ceases to feel like absence and begins to feel like power. To cultivate silence is to reclaim authorship over your own mind. You no longer react to the chaos around you. You respond from the calm within. Like Marcus Aurelius walking through the corridors of Rome, surrounded by politics and noise, yet writing in his private journal words that still vibrate with stillness. "Nowhere," he wrote, "can man find a quieter or more untroubled retreat than in his own soul." That retreat is not isolation, it's return. Return to the inner citadel where judgment is suspended, emotion is observed, and peace is chosen. So when you choose silence, do not mistake it for passivity. It is the highest form of action, the alignment of thought, feeling, and will into one centered force. It's the refusal to waste energy on the transient and the trivial. In every moment you stay silent, you reclaim energy that would have been spent on noise, and that energy becomes clarity, endurance, focus. It is in silence that the philosopher becomes a warrior, disciplined not by armor, but by awareness. Silence is not absence. It's architecture for awareness. It builds inner walls against chaos, not to keep life out, but to give it form. When you learn to dwell within those walls, you discover that the quiet is not empty. It's alive. It speaks in the language of strength. It says, I am present. I am grounded. I do not need to explain. We explain because we fear being misunderstood. We fear being judged, dismissed, or forgotten. Yet every explanation we give, every attempt to make others see what we mean, binds us tighter to their perception. The paradox is cruel but revealing. The more we try to control how others see us, the less control we have over ourselves. Marcus Aurelius saw this clearly when he wrote, "Be indifferent to what others think, for they too are mortal and forget." Every attempt to be understood is a quiet confession that we no longer trust our own understanding. Human beings are narrative creatures. We survive by telling stories about who we are, what we want, and why we act. These stories begin as meaning, but often decay into justification. We explain not to reveal truth, but to protect our image. It is the ego's defense mechanism, wrapped in the illusion of reason. We say, "Let me explain," when what we truly mean is, "Please don't misjudge me." Yet, as Seneca warned, he who fears being judged knows that his conscience is not clear. Every unnecessary explanation is a symptom of inner imbalance, a sign that we've placed the audience outside us, above the authority within us. The Stoics called this dependency externa, the orientation of one's peace toward external things. It is the opposite of freedom. Freedom for them was autarkia, self-sufficiency, the ability to stand inwardly complete regardless of others' opinions. The moment we explain ourselves excessively, we abandon that ground. We trade sovereignty for sympathy, truth for validation. In our desperation to be seen, we forget to be real. And so we speak endlessly, louder, faster, clearer, hoping that if we just articulate it well enough, someone will finally understand. But no one can understand what we haven't yet embodied. Neuroscience adds another layer to this truth. The brain rewards us for being understood. When someone nods in agreement, or when we receive a like, a heart, or a simple "I see," dopamine surges through the limbic system. It feels good, like approval is nourishment. But as with all quick dopamine, it fades and we seek another hit. Over time, the habit forms. We speak to feel seen, not to convey truth. And so, our inner silence becomes foreign. The prefrontal cortex, the seat of reflection and restraint, loses dominance to the limbic brain, the realm of emotion and reaction. The result is an endless loop of explanation, performance, and depletion. Marcus Aurelius advised himself daily to remember the insignificance of praise. "Soon you will have forgotten all things," he wrote, "and all things will have forgotten you." The modern mind resists this. It is addicted to its digital echo, to being acknowledged, amplified, archived. But the soul does not thrive in the archive, it thrives in presence. To live explaining yourself is to live in exile from that presence. It's to exist in commentary rather than in consciousness. There is humility in recognizing that most people will never understand us, not because they are incapable, but because they are busy understanding themselves. And that is as it should be. You were not born to be explained. You were born to be experienced. The philosopher understands this, that life is not a debate to be won, but a truth to be lived. The scientist, too, understands this, that the brain changes not through words, but through practice, repetition, and embodiment. Meaning must descend from the mind into the nervous system before it becomes real. When we stop explaining, we enter observation. The shift is subtle but profound. The mind, freed from the compulsion to defend, begins to see clearly. You start to notice your motives, your tone, your reactions. You begin to ask, am I speaking from clarity or from fear? From integrity or from need? The less you explain, the more you perceive. The energy once spent on convincing others transforms into awareness of yourself. In that awareness, ego fades and wisdom appears. The wisdom that Seneca called tranquillitas animi, the tranquility of the soul. Every unnecessary word is a ripple in the water of the mind. Every explanation that seeks approval disturbs its stillness. The task is not to drown in silence, but to rest upon it. To trust that what is true needs no defense, no ornament, no witness. It simply is. Just as light requires no announcement to be seen, integrity requires no justification to be felt. When you stop explaining, you don't lose connection. You refine it. You begin to relate through authenticity, not argument, through coherence, not persuasion. The modern world measures meaning by volume. The Stoic world measured it by depth. One sought applause, the other alignment. You cannot do both. At some point you must choose, to live performing for understanding, or to live becoming the kind of person whose silence already speaks. The first path exhausts, the second transforms, and once you taste the peace that follows the refusal to explain, you realize that understanding is not something you demand from others. It is something you cultivate within yourself. When the mind no longer seeks to be understood, it becomes understanding itself. That is the quiet revolution. It is not loud, not proud, not defensive. It's the stillness that Marcus found in his solitude, the humility that Epictetus taught to his students, the balance that neuroscience now measures as coherence and regulation. To stop explaining is to begin observing. And when you observe long enough, you discover that peace was never in being understood. It was in the act of understanding. Observation is not passivity. It is the purest form of intelligence, the act of watching without immediately reacting, of seeing what is rather than what we fear or hope to see. The Stoics called this prosoche, the disciplined attention to the present moment. It is the foundation of all virtue, for without awareness, courage becomes recklessness, justice becomes pride, and discipline becomes self-punishment. Observation is the pause between impulse and action, between the noise of the world and the silence of understanding. The human mind is wired to react before it reflects. Long before we think, the amygdala, the brain's emotional alarm system, fires in anticipation of threat or approval. Every time we receive a criticism, a disagreement, or even a perceived challenge, this primitive system floods the body with cortisol and adrenaline, urging us to act, defend, explain. This is the ancient mechanism of survival, useful for escaping predators, but destructive for seeking peace. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman calls this the reactive loop, the automatic cycle of emotion that hijacks focus and narrows consciousness. To observe before reacting is to interrupt that loop. It is to strengthen the bridge between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex, the part of the brain responsible for judgment, foresight, and self-control. Each pause, each conscious breath, rewires this bridge. The neural pathways of restraint become stronger. The chemistry of awareness begins to override the chemistry of fear. In time, silence ceases to be a suppression and becomes a superpower. You are no longer ruled by emotion, you rule emotion through perception. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, understood this principle not through science, but through suffering. It is not things that disturb us, he said, but our judgments about things. Between what happens and what we believe about what happens lies the entire field of freedom. That space, so small in time but infinite in potential, is where observation lives. Every time you inhabit that space, you become a little more free. Every time you speak without entering it, you surrender a piece of your sovereignty. Observation is not indifference, it's intimacy with reality. It's the decision to experience the world without distorting it through the fog of emotion or the pressure of expectation. Marcus Aurelius practiced this every night, reflecting on the day not to judge it, but to see it clearly. He dissected each reaction, each irritation, each burst of pride or anger, asking, what was within my control, what was not? That question is a neurological filter as much as it is a moral one. It separates signal from noise, truth from story, presence from ego. Huberman teaches that focus is finite, a resource that can be spent or conserved. Each reactive outburst, each unnecessary explanation drains it. Each observation, each moment of silence restores it. This is energy conservation on a cellular level. The brain consumes up to 20% of the body's energy. A distracted mind consumes even more. But when you cultivate observation, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the state of calm alertness. You move from reaction to response, from chaos to coherence. The Stoics called this alignment with nature. Neuroscience calls it regulation. Both point to the same truth. Observation is harmony between body and mind. It is the end of the internal argument. In that stillness, you begin to notice things you never saw before. The subtleties of tone, the origins of thought, the quiet wisdom of the body itself. You start realizing how often emotion tries to speak before truth does. You see that most reactions are not yours, but inherited patterns, biological echoes of survival dressed in personal narratives. The power of observation is not that it silences the world, but that it reveals it. When you stop rushing to answer, the truth of things unfolds naturally. People expose themselves not through what they say, but through what they expect you to react to. Life reveals its patterns not in noise, but in rhythm. In silence, perception expands. What once seemed personal becomes universal. What once felt like conflict becomes data. The philosopher and the scientist finally meet, one calling it wisdom, the other calling it awareness. Each breath you take before reacting is an act of mastery. It is the pause that breaks the pattern, the split second where a different future becomes possible. In that breath, the ancient and the modern meet. The Stoic's moral choice and the neuroscientist's synaptic reconfiguration. The breath is the hinge of transformation. You may not change the world in that moment, but you change the world within you. And that is where all real change begins. Every pause becomes a choice. Every breath, a moment of freedom. That is how the disciplined mind moves through life, not by denying emotion, but by directing it. Not by suppressing thought, but by seeing through it. The observer is not detached. He is deeply awake. He is the still point in the turning world, unmoved yet moving everything. There is a mirror that no one else can look into for you. The mind itself. It reflects everything you believe, everything you fear, everything you've refused to face. When you stop explaining, you're left alone with that reflection. The noise fades, and what remains is what you've been avoiding, yourself. The silence that once felt peaceful now feels heavy. Thoughts echo louder, doubts rise from the corners of consciousness. It's uncomfortable because, for the first time, there is nothing left to hide behind. The self you performed begins to dissolve, and the self you truly are begins to appear. Epictetus taught that the origin of suffering is not the world itself, but the interpretations we attach to it. Men are disturbed not by things, but by the views they take of them. This truth, so ancient yet so precise, aligns perfectly with what modern neuroscience calls cognitive appraisal, the brain's habit of creating meaning before awareness even arrives. The default mode network, the region of the brain that constructs our sense of self, activates when the mind turns inward. It links memories, emotions, and narratives into a continuous story called me. But that story is not fixed. It is rewritten every time you reflect consciously. Self-reflection, therefore, is not simply awareness, it's authorship. When you dare to face the mirror of the mind without judgment, neuroplasticity begins its quiet work. New pathways form as old ones lose their grip. The brain literally rewires itself according to what you choose to observe. In silence, you see which thoughts are truly yours and which are borrowed from others, from family, culture, or past wounds. Most people never look long enough to find that distinction. They live reacting to echoes rather than truth. The philosopher steps closer to the mirror, knowing that every distortion he faces is a chance to correct perception. The neuroscientist would say, awareness changes neural representation. The Stoic would say, perception shapes destiny. Both are right. The mirror reveals what no explanation ever could, the degree to which your inner world governs your outer one. You begin to see that what you call problems are often reflections of unexamined patterns. That anger you think is about someone else. It's your own expectation colliding with reality. That sadness you blame on circumstance. It's resistance to impermanence. Each emotion points to an internal conflict, an unhealed part of the story you keep retelling. When you observe it without judgment, it loses its grip. When you listen instead of argue, it transforms. This is not repression. It's refinement, turning noise into signal, reaction into reason. Seneca believed that the mind could be trained the way an athlete trains his body. Modern science confirms it. Neuroimaging shows that meditation, reflection, and introspection literally reshape the density and connectivity of gray matter in the prefrontal cortex, the seat of rational thought. The more often you practice silence, the more the brain learns to recognize it as safety, not threat. Eventually, your nervous system ceases to interpret stillness as danger. You no longer seek escape through words or distractions. You begin to rest inside your own consciousness. In that rest, something extraordinary happens. You start to perceive life not as a sequence of events to interpret, but as a field of patterns to understand. The Stoics called this the logos, the rational structure of the universe. When the mind mirrors this structure, clarity replaces confusion. The philosopher no longer fights what is, he cooperates with it. He becomes, in Marcus Aurelius's words, a part of the whole, accepting the whole with love. That alignment is not mystical, it's neurological coherence, the brain, heart, and body oscillating in harmony. Joe Dispenza calls this becoming the observer and the creator simultaneously. But reflection is not without danger. The same mirror that reveals truth can also magnify illusion if you look through ego instead of awareness. Introspection can turn into rumination, a cycle of self-criticism that deepens neural pathways of guilt and fear. The key difference lies in attention. Awareness observes, rumination judges. Awareness accepts, rumination resists. The Stoic practice of daily review, what Seneca called self-scrutiny without self-contempt, is the antidote. To look into the mind without judgment is to reclaim authorship of your own perception. Every time you turn inward with calm curiosity, you reclaim space once occupied by fear. You teach your nervous system that stillness is safe, that thought is not threat. Gradually, silence becomes your teacher. You begin to sense that beneath every mental storm lies a still surface waiting to be seen. In that stillness, there is no need for explanation, because understanding has replaced it. The mirror no longer distorts, it reflects. When you stop explaining, you confront the only voice that matters, your own. And if you stay long enough in that confrontation, the voice softens. It stops defending. It stops performing. It begins to speak truth. Quietly, steadily, without demand. What remains is not noise, not confusion, but presence. The mirror no longer frightens you because you finally recognize the face it reflects. It was never the world that misunderstood you. It was you who had forgotten how to listen. We use words as armor. They protect us from the sting of silence, from the vulnerability of being seen without explanation. Every sentence we construct becomes a shield against judgment, rejection, or failure. We speak not always to communicate, but to conceal. Seneca warned that the one who needs excuses is already guilty in his own eyes. And this guilt, often invisible even to ourselves, is what keeps us talking. We fear what silence might reveal, so we keep filling it with noise. Yet what we defend with words, we also imprison. Every justification is a wall around our freedom. Behind every need to explain lies an unspoken fear, fear of not being enough. So we decorate our insecurities with language. We tell stories that make our actions appear reasonable, our intentions noble, our mistakes forgivable. We rehearse these explanations until they sound like truth, but the more we repeat them, the further we drift from honesty. We mistake narrative control for integrity. In doing so, we trade authenticity for approval, power for performance. The Stoics understood this long before psychology gave it a name. They called it enslavement to opinion, the loss of inner sovereignty through the hunger for validation. Modern neuroscience confirms what the ancients felt in their bones. When we defend ourselves verbally, the body reacts as if under attack. Cortisol rises, heart rate accelerates. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and self-control, is hijacked by the amygdala's emotional alarm. We are no longer speaking from truth, but from survival. Every defensive word becomes a neural reinforcement of insecurity. We are telling the brain, I am not safe unless I explain. Silence, therefore, is not just restraint, it is reprogramming. To resist the urge to justify is to teach the nervous system that peace does not require approval. Seneca's insight was profoundly psychological. He who fears being judged already judges himself. The habit of justification begins not with others' criticism, but with our own. We attack ourselves before anyone else can. We imagine conversations where we are accused, misunderstood, diminished, and we respond in our minds with perfect counter-arguments. But this inner courtroom is endless. No verdict ever brings peace because the prosecution and defense are both parts of us. The only way to end the trial is to step out of it. Silence is not losing the argument. It's leaving the courtroom. When you stop using words as armor, you discover what vulnerability truly is. It's not weakness, it's unfiltered presence. It's the willingness to exist without controlling perception. Epictetus taught that the philosopher's task is not to appear wise, but to be wise. Neuroscience mirrors this with what's known as authenticity congruence, when internal states align with external expression. The brain rewards this congruence with oxytocin and serotonin, chemicals of trust and calm. The more authentic you are, the safer your body feels. The more you defend, the more threatened it becomes. This is why true power begins when you no longer need to defend your peace. The mind trained in silence no longer interprets misunderstanding as danger. It understands that other people's opinions are simply projections, reflections of their own inner state. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, "Whatever anyone says or does, I must be good. It is for them to act as they will." That is not resignation, it's sovereignty. It's the understanding that your integrity is self-sustaining, needing neither permission nor applause. Psychologically, silence interrupts the stress feedback loop. When you stop verbalizing your defense, the hypothalamus slows cortisol production, and the body returns to equilibrium. Each unspoken reaction is a small act of neurochemical discipline, the transformation of adrenaline into awareness. Over time, this becomes habit. The mind learns that composure is strength, that calm is control. This is how philosophy becomes physiology. The teachings of Stoicism are not abstract virtues. They are patterns of regulation written into the nervous system through repetition and choice. In the modern world, where every thought demands a comment and every belief a debate, silence is rebellion. To say nothing when provoked is to stand above the emotional economy of attention. It's to refuse to trade your peace for relevance. The quiet mind is not passive, it is strategic. It knows that most conflicts die from neglect, not from victory. Words are fuel. Silence is oxygen withdrawal. The one who speaks last rarely wins, he merely prolongs the fire. The one who stays silent ends it. So when the urge to explain rises, to defend, to clarify, to prove, pause. Feel where it begins in the body. Is it the chest tightening, the jaw clenching, the pulse quickening? That's not truth trying to emerge. That's fear trying to escape. Breathe. Let the silence stretch. Let the discomfort do its work. For within that quiet lies your transformation. Each unspoken justification is a brick removed from the walls of self-defense, making room for authenticity to breathe again. Eventually, you'll realize something remarkable. Silence doesn't make you invisible. It makes you undeniable. The world listens differently to those who don't need to explain. Their words, when finally spoken, carry weight. Their presence, when finally felt, speaks before sound. This is the paradox of restraint. The less you defend, the stronger your truth becomes. The quieter you are, the more power you hold. True power begins when you no longer need to defend your peace. It's the moment when the voice within grows louder than the noise outside. It's the discipline of stillness, the freedom of authenticity, the calm of mastery. In a world where everyone speaks to be right, you remain silent to be real. Restraint is not suppression. It is the deliberate act of mastering impulse, of choosing clarity over chaos and integrity over reaction. The Stoics called this sophrosyne, the virtue of self-governance, the balance between desire and reason. Cato the Younger embodied it with unshakable dignity. He was not the loudest man in the Roman Senate, nor the most celebrated, but he was the hardest to corrupt, because nothing external could provoke him beyond his principles. Restraint was his power, the quiet kind, invisible to crowds, yet formidable to those who understood what it meant to rule oneself. To practice restraint is to realize that not every emotion deserves an audience. Not every thought must become an action. Modern neuroscience reveals why this is so difficult. Our brains are wired for immediacy. The limbic system, the emotional center, demands release. Anger, excitement, fear. Each floods the body with energy that begs for expression. But when you resist that urge, you engage a higher system, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of judgment and foresight. Each moment of restraint is neuroplastic training. You are teaching the brain that control is not deprivation, it is command. Andrew Huberman calls this process top-down regulation. It's the capacity of the conscious mind to guide the emotional machinery below. Each time you delay gratification, refrain from reacting, or remain silent under provocation, neurons in the prefrontal cortex strengthen their connections. Over time, these pathways become highways of discipline. What once required effort becomes instinct. The mind begins to move like a trained soldier, precise, measured, unshaken. The Stoics intuited this truth without microscopes or imaging. "No man is free," wrote Epictetus, "who is not master of himself." Freedom, then, is not in the absence of restraint, but in its perfection. Restraint is not weakness, it's command. It's the art of channeling energy instead of wasting it. The untrained mind burns itself through reaction, through arguments, indulgences, over-explanations. The disciplined mind stores that energy, converting it into focus, endurance, and creative force. Every time you choose not to respond to provocation, you reclaim a portion of your vitality. Seneca wrote that anger, if not restrained, is more destructive than any enemy. Neuroscience translates that warning into chemistry. Unchecked emotion floods the system with stress hormones, weakening immunity, memory, and decision-making. Restraint, on the other hand, restores equilibrium, reactivating parasympathetic calm, a physiological reflection of inner peace. To live with restraint is to become unmanipulable. The world thrives on reaction. Economies, politics, media, all feed on impulsive attention. Outrage is profitable, stillness is not. But stillness is where truth survives. Marcus Aurelius warned himself daily, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." Restraint is the application of that wisdom in real time. It is the power to stand amid noise and choose not to participate in it. It's not silence out of fear, but silence out of sovereignty. In psychology, this is known as response inhibition, the ability to suppress immediate impulses in favor of long-term goals. Studies show that people with high inhibitory control experience greater life satisfaction, emotional balance, and success in their pursuits. Their restraint is not repression, it's focus. They have learned the same lesson that the Stoics taught millennia ago: control your reaction, and you control your destiny. Cato's restraint was legendary. When his rivals insulted him, he did not retaliate. When temptation called, he did not answer. He understood that virtue is not proven in peace, but tested in provocation. Every slight, Every injustice was an opportunity to practice mastery. Modern psychology echoes this through the concept of frustration tolerance, the resilience to endure discomfort without impulsive response. The greater your tolerance, the more stable your identity. The more stable your identity, the less the world can move you. Restraint is also aesthetic. There is beauty in withholding, in the pause between stimulus and expression. Just as a composer uses silence to give shape to music, the Stoic uses restraint to give shape to the soul. Words, emotions, and actions gain weight when chosen carefully. Noise loses its power. The one who shouts may dominate attention, but the one who pauses commands respect. The still mind is not disengaged, it is deliberate. It chooses its battles with surgical precision. Huberman describes this state as the pause before power. During that pause, the nervous system recalibrates, redirecting energy from the reactive centers to the regions of executive control. The shift is measurable. Heart rate slows, breathing deepens, attention sharpens. In that moment, you experience what the Stoics meant by living in accordance with nature. Nature does not rush. It unfolds with purpose. The oak tree doesn't fight the wind. It bends with it, conserving strength for the storms passing. Restraint is that wisdom in motion, a flexible strength that outlasts chaos. There is an elegance in restraint, a nobility in the unseen act of holding back. It's a strength that doesn't need to announce itself. The Stoic does not repress emotion, he refines it. He channels it into discipline, expression into action, reaction into wisdom. The modern mind, intoxicated by immediacy, will call it cold. But it is not coldness. It is composure, the calm that comes not from emptiness, but from order. Restraint is not weakness. It is command, over thought, over impulse, over ego. It is the quiet authority of a mind that no longer wastes energy proving its worth. It doesn't fight for control. It is control. And in a world addicted to reaction, the one who masters restraint becomes unbreakable. Stillness is not the absence of movement. It is the mastery of energy. To be still does not mean to stop, but to move with precision, to act only when necessary, and to conserve everything that does not serve the essential. The body and the mind are systems of energy, and every thought, every word, every reaction consumes a measurable portion of that energy. The Stoics understood this intuitively. They called it economy of action, the art of directing effort only where reason commands it. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Let not your mind run ahead of what is, nor expend itself on what does not concern it." In modern terms, it is neurochemical discipline, the preservation of dopamine for purpose rather than distraction. Neuroscience reveals the same principle through another language. The brain runs on limited fuel, glucose, oxygen, and dopamine, the molecules of motivation and focus. Every act of unnecessary speech, every impulsive defense, every indulgence in reaction drains this energy. Andrew Huberman explains that effort, willpower, and attention are metabolically expensive. They rely on neurochemical resources that must be managed wisely. When we waste them on explaining ourselves, arguing with illusions, or feeding trivial emotions, we enter a deficit. Fatigue, confusion, and anxiety follow, not because we lack potential, but because we've squandered our mental currency on what doesn't matter. The Stoic practice of silence was therefore not only moral, it was energetic. Each word withheld, each reaction paused, each judgment delayed was a deposit into the account of self-mastery. In the same way that fasting restores metabolic balance, silence restores neurochemical order. The mind, deprived of its habitual chatter, begins to renew itself. Neural pathways associated with overthinking quiet down, and those responsible for focus and clarity grow stronger. Studies have shown that just moments of deep silence increase the brain's capacity for memory and learning, as the hippocampus reorganizes and consolidates information. What appears as stillness on the outside is in fact regeneration within. Huberman's work on dopamine regulation reveals something profound. Motivation is not sustained by constant reward, but by controlled expenditure. When dopamine is spent without purpose, through constant stimulation, notifications, and validation, the baseline drops. The result is apathy, restlessness, the inability to find joy in meaningful work. But when you practice restraint, when you stop explaining and start conserving, dopamine resets. The brain relearns how to find satisfaction in effort itself, not an outcome. This is the biology of Stoic joy, a state not of excitement, but of steady vitality. The mind becomes lean, strong, ready. In this way, stillness is not an escape from life, but a refinement of it. Energy once wasted on defending ego is redirected toward creation, learning, presence. You begin to experience what Musonius Rufus called the joy of inner economy, the serenity that comes from needing less to feel whole. When you stop leaking energy through unnecessary reactions, your body feels lighter, your thoughts clearer, your actions more deliberate. The world slows down, not because it changed, but because your perception no longer burns through its reserves trying to control it. Seneca once compared the undisciplined mind to a runner who exhausts himself by changing direction too often. Every shift in attention, every emotional spike, every unfiltered conversation is a sprint toward depletion. The disciplined mind, by contrast, moves like a long-distance traveler, steady, intentional, and enduring. Neuroscience calls this attentional control, the ability to direct focus where it matters and hold it there despite distraction. Silence is the training ground for that control. It's where attention learns endurance. Even in biology, conservation is the law of survival. The heart does not beat faster than it must. The lungs do not draw more air than they need. Nature is restraint perfected. To live in harmony with it, as the Stoics advised, is to live efficiently, not hurried, not scattered, but coherent. The mind that learns stillness mirrors the order of the cosmos, vast in potential, measured in movement. The less it wastes, the more it creates. The quieter it becomes, the more it perceives. Every unnecessary word is a current of energy released into the void. Every silence held with awareness is energy retained, refined, transformed. Over time, this conservation becomes power, a kind of quiet intensity that others can feel. It is not loud, not aggressive, but magnetic. Joe Dispenza describes it as coherence, the state in which your brain and heart vibrate in unison, creating a measurable electromagnetic field of calm authority. The Stoics would have called it virtue made visible, the radiance of inner order. Every word you save becomes power reclaimed. This is not poetry, it's physics. Energy cannot be destroyed, only redirected. When you stop explaining, you do not lose anything. You gather yourself. You return to the source from which all clarity flows. The noise of the world scatters energy outward. Silence draws it inward, like gravity reclaiming its stars. The discipline of stillness is not the death of movement. It is the perfection of motion. It is not the absence of energy. It is energy under command. And once you learn to conserve it, nothing outside you can ever truly drain it again. Presence is a language of its own. It does not speak in words, yet it communicates everything that matters. It is the invisible gravity of coherence, when thought, emotion, and action align into one unbroken current. The world feels it before it understands it. In your presence, people sense the truth of what you become, not what you say. This is the quiet eloquence of mastery, the state in which being replaces explanation. The Stoics believed that virtue radiates. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." That is the language of presence. It needs no defense, no persuasion. It simply is. When the mind becomes still and integrity consistent, words lose their necessity. The philosopher's task is no longer to speak wisdom, but to embody it. The same truth is reflected in modern neuroscience. Joe Dispenza speaks of heart-brain coherence, a measurable state where the body's electromagnetic field becomes synchronized with thought and emotion. In this coherence, communication transcends language. You don't project, you emanate. You don't try to convince, you simply align, and people feel it. The reason presence speaks louder than persuasion lies in how the human brain perceives truth. Long before we process words, our limbic system reads energy, tone, rhythm, micro-expression, breath. These signals bypass logic and enter emotion directly. Daniel Goleman calls this the empathic circuit, the neurological foundation of emotional intelligence. When your internal state is calm and coherent, others regulate themselves through your presence. You become, neurologically speaking, a mirror of order. Your silence reshapes the emotional climate of those around you. Discipline creates this resonance. A scattered mind emits confusion. A disciplined mind emits certainty. The Stoics pursued virtue for this reason, not to preach morality, but to embody stability. In a chaotic world, the one who remains unshaken becomes magnetic. His calm draws attention more effectively than any rhetoric. His actions carry more persuasion than argument ever could. Seneca knew this when he wrote, "Long is the road by precept, but short and effective by example." Presence shortens that road. It transforms philosophy into experience. From a neuroscientific view, this magnetism has structure. When you enter a state of focused awareness, slow breathing, calm attention, centered posture, your vagus nerve signals safety throughout the body. Heart rate steadies, cortisol decreases, the brain shifts from defensive beta waves to coherent alpha rhythms. This calm becomes perceptible to others through subtle biological cues. Relaxed tone, steady gaze, measured movement. Their own nervous systems, through mirror neurons, begin to synchronize. Without speaking a word, you've transmitted serenity. Your presence has become the message. Silence, when filled with awareness, becomes communicative. It says, "I am not here to convince, I am here to be." That distinction changes everything. The salesman talks, the sage listens, the anxious prove, the peaceful demonstrate. True power never announces itself because it doesn't need to. The same law governs both physics and virtue. Energy flows from coherence, not chaos. The sun does not speak, yet everything lives by its light. When presence replaces persuasion, relationships transform. You no longer argue to win, but to understand. You no longer react to tone, but to intention. People begin to trust you, not because you've explained yourself, but because you've become transparent in essence. Goleman's research calls this authentic resonance, when what you think, feel, and do form one unbroken truth. It's the end of pretense and the beginning of influence. Epictetus told his students that what is good need not be proclaimed. The modern world has forgotten this. It shouts constantly, mistaking volume for strength, attention for respect. But presence has a frequency words can't reach. It's in the quiet confidence of one who knows his direction. It's in the calm that follows a mind no longer split between proving and being. This is why the Stoic ideal and the neuroscientific principle converge. Both understand that coherence, whether moral or biological, is what makes life powerful. The more you cultivate presence, the less you need to perform. You begin to move through the world like a tuning fork of calm, resonating truth into chaos. Those who meet you feel steadier, even if they can't explain why. This is the silent persuasion of alignment, the influence of order upon disorder. It's not manipulation, it's gravity. When you are coherent, you attract coherence. When you are scattered, you amplify noise. The world is saturated with words, explanations, and declarations. Most of them fade as quickly as they're spoken. But presence, true presence, endures. It lingers after you leave the room. It moves through the silence between sentences. It speaks through every gesture, every pause, every act of attention. The language of presence is not spoken through the mouth, but through the nervous system. It is felt, not heard. When you become aligned, you no longer need to convince. You simply radiate truth. The world listens differently to those who are whole. Your silence becomes a statement. Your calm becomes communication. And in that state, you discover what the Stoics and scientists both knew, that the most eloquent expression of wisdom is not in what you say, but in what you are. Detachment is not indifference. It is the liberation of effort from the tyranny of outcome, the quiet decision to act with excellence but release control over what follows. Musonius Rufus taught that virtue is enough, that the value of an action lies not in its result but in the integrity of its intention. Modern neuroscience mirrors this ancient truth. Dopamine, the molecule of motivation, is healthiest not when it is bound to achievement, but when it is attached to the process itself. When you link your energy to doing, rather than to winning, you reclaim sovereignty over your own chemistry, and with it, your peace. The modern mind has been trained to chase results. Every goal is measured in likes, followers, numbers, promotions, markers that promise satisfaction but deliver exhaustion. We live in constant anticipation, never fully inhabiting the present. In this state, dopamine becomes unstable. It spikes with every hope and collapses with every delay. The brain begins to interpret life as a sequence of unfinished transactions. This is the root of anxiety, the endless postponement of contentment until something external happens. The Stoics saw this pattern centuries before science named it. Epictetus warned, "Desire only what depends on you." What depends on you is the action, not the applause. Neuroscientist Andrew Huberman explains that the key to sustained motivation lies in reward prediction error, the brain's comparison between expectation and reality. The wider the gap, the greater the crash. But when you focus not on outcomes but on the discipline of effort itself, the system stabilizes. Dopamine becomes a steady current rather than a storm. You begin to enjoy the act of becoming rather than the illusion of arrival. That is the biology of Stoic detachment, a nervous system trained to find reward in virtue, not vanity. Detachment does not mean disengagement. It means presence without possession. To detach from outcome is to participate fully in the process while refusing to be owned by it. Marcus Aurelius embodied this when he wrote, "Do every act as though it were your last." He did not mean haste. He meant sincerity, to pour your energy completely into what is now, as if tomorrow's recognition or failure were irrelevant. That is what freedom feels like, the mind no longer bargaining with results, but existing in alignment with its own purpose. Joe Dispenza's work on neuroplasticity echoes this principle through science. When the brain stops obsessing over results, it moves from the analytical beta state into alpha coherence, a rhythm associated with creativity, intuition, and flow. In that state, the body begins to heal, the mind becomes inventive, and actions align with intuition. It's the biological version of what the Stoics called living according to nature. Nature does not rush, compare, or justify, it unfolds. The flower does not explain why it blooms, it simply becomes what it was meant to be. Detachment is also the end of ego's dominion. The ego measures worth through recognition. It demands evidence that effort matters, but recognition is unstable because it exists outside your control. The Stoic understood this instability as slavery to external things. Neuroscience describes it as reward dependency, the brain's reliance on external feedback loops to generate satisfaction. To break that dependency is to reclaim the inner economy of joy. The wise man does not need applause because his mind has become its own source of affirmation. His dopamine is self-regulated, not outsourced. There is a serenity that comes from this independence. It's not apathy, it's stability. The same discipline that governs silence now governs emotion. You begin to understand that victory and defeat are illusions of scale, not of value. The only true victory is mastery of self. The only true failure is surrender to chaos. This perspective rewires both mind and body. The heart rate remains steady in stress. The breath remains slow in uncertainty. The voice remains calm in misunderstanding. You are no longer reacting to the world's temperature. You are setting it. When you detach from outcome, you rediscover the joy of engagement. You act not because success is guaranteed, but because excellence is its own reward. This is what Jordan Peterson describes as carrying your burden voluntarily, the psychological act of transforming effort into meaning. The Stoic would simply call it virtue. And in both frameworks, the result is the same. Your actions cease to be transactions and become expressions of identity. Neuroscience tells us that flow, that optimal state of immersion, occurs when skill meets challenge just beyond comfort. The Stoic tells us that virtue is strengthened the same way, when effort meets adversity just beyond ease. Both describe the same territory, the living edge where discipline turns into grace. That is the realm of detachment, full engagement, zero obsession. The body moves, the mind observes, and both operate as one. Detachment is not withdrawal. It is commitment purified of expectation. It is work done with the same calm, whether praised or ignored. It is action that does not demand result, speech that does not seek echo, purpose that does not require witness. When you reach this state, life itself becomes lighter. You begin to see that the true burden was never the work, but the weight of wanting control over its outcome. Detach from applause, anchor in action. Because when the outcome no longer defines you, failure cannot diminish you, and success cannot corrupt you. You have transcended the economy of reward and punishment. You have entered the timeless space where effort itself becomes peace. Justice begins within. Before it governs nations or laws, it must first rule the individual mind. The Stoics understood that there can be no order in the world if there is disorder within the soul. Marcus Aurelius warned himself each morning that he could not demand virtue from others while neglecting it in his own thoughts. Justice, in the Stoic sense, is not punishment. It is harmony, the alignment between principle and behavior, between what you know is right and what you actually do. Jordan Peterson frames the same truth psychologically. Set your house in perfect order before you criticize the world. Both mean this. That moral authority begins not in argument, but in coherence. To live justly is to stop negotiating your values for comfort or approval. The modern mind does this constantly, bending integrity for acceptance, truth for attention, ethics for convenience. But every compromise, however small, fractures the psyche. It creates a split between what we believe and what we perform. Neuroscience calls this cognitive dissonance, the stress that arises when one's actions conflict with one's beliefs. Over time, this dissonance floods the nervous system with cortisol, dulling intuition and corroding peace. The Stoics would simply call it vice, the disease of a divided soul. The cure is alignment. To act with justice is to heal the split between knowing and doing. Justice begins where excuses end. You cannot be at peace while betraying your own standards. The brain is wired for integrity. When behavior and belief synchronize, the prefrontal cortex, responsible for reasoning and planning, communicates fluidly with the limbic system, reducing inner tension. Guilt, shame, and anxiety decrease. Serotonin levels stabilize. You feel in tune, not because the world has changed, but because you have stopped lying to yourself. Seneca said, "A good character, once established, cannot be hidden. It shines through action." Justice, then, is not an external badge. It's an inner frequency that others recognize even in silence. To practice justice in thought is to treat your own mind as a citizen of reason, to discipline your opinions before disciplining others. Marcus Aurelius would examine his judgments the way a judge examines a case, weighing evidence, questioning motive, stripping away bias. He knew that injustice often begins in perception. We condemn others for the very weaknesses we ignore in ourselves. Hierocles described justice as the widening circles of concern, beginning with self-governance, extending to family, then to community, then to all humanity. The Stoic is not detached from the world. He is attached to truth wherever it appears. His loyalty is not to tribe, but to virtue. In the modern context, this translates into psychological maturity. Justice within is emotional regulation elevated to moral principle. It's the ability to respond with fairness even when provoked, to judge behavior without hating the person, to disagree without dehumanizing. Daniel Goleman calls this empathic intelligence, the fusion of compassion with discipline. In neurobiological terms, it's the prefrontal cortex moderating the amygdala's primitive impulses. In philosophical terms, it's humanity rising above instinct. Justice is this exact bridge, emotion governed by principle. But inner justice demands constant maintenance. Every time you rationalize what you know is wrong, you weaken the bridge between intention and action. Every time you justify cruelty, gossip, or deceit, you allow chaos to seep back into the architecture of your mind. Seneca wrote that the greatest punishment for injustice is to become unjust. Neuroscience confirms that repetition of unethical behavior desensitizes the brain's anterior cingulate cortex, the region responsible for moral awareness. The line between right and wrong literally fades from perception. Integrity, then, is not a fixed trait. It's a neural habit, one that must be exercised daily or it atrophies. Justice also means balance, not moral rigidity, but moral rhythm. To be just with others, you must also be just with yourself. Self-condemnation masquerades as virtue but serves no one. The Stoics practiced forgiveness as discipline, not sentiment. They understood that guilt without correction is vanity. Neuroscientifically, forgiveness restores serotonin and reduces sympathetic arousal, the fight-or-flight response. To forgive yourself is not to excuse failure, but to learn efficiently from it. Justice thrives where self-compassion and accountability coexist. Cato the Younger lived this balance with precision. In public, he was incorruptible. In private, he was austere but not cruel to himself. His life was a lesson in inner order, in holding one's ground even when the world collapses around it. Justice, to him, was not politics but posture, the refusal to yield to falsehood. When you hold that posture, your body mirrors it. The spine straightens, the breath deepens, the gaze steadies. Neuroscience might call it coherence between cognition and physiology. Philosophy calls it dignity. To live with justice is to become unshakable from within. You no longer chase approval or fear rejection because your actions are self-verified. You have a standard that no applause can raise or silence can lower. You stop performing virtue and start embodying it. The world may still misinterpret you, but interpretation loses power when you know your truth. Justice within produces serenity without, because conflict has nowhere left to grow. You become just, not when others agree, but when you stand in integrity. Justice is the silent symmetry between what you think, what you feel, and what you do. It is the quiet strength of a man or woman who no longer needs to shout righteousness, because the alignment itself radiates authority. When your inner court is in order, no external judgment can condemn you. Serenity is not escape. It is presence purified of disturbance, a mind so well trained that peace no longer depends on circumstances. The Stoics called this state eudaimonia, flourishing through virtue, a harmony between inner order and outer chaos. It is not the naive peace of denial, but the earned peace of discipline. To reach it, one must walk through discomfort, endure misunderstanding, and still remain grounded in clarity. The Stoic mind is not empty of emotion. It is free from enslavement to it. That is serenity, not the silence of indifference, but the quiet rhythm of mastery. Marcus Aurelius described it as the mind sitting upright. In that image lies both posture and metaphor, a mental spine that does not bend to anger or despair. Modern neuroscience now explains what the ancients practiced. When one regulates emotion consciously, the prefrontal cortex strengthens its governance over the amygdala. Stress signals diminish, serotonin stabilizes, and the body returns to equilibrium. Serenity, therefore, is not a miracle of mood. It is the biological outcome of philosophical training. Each act of restraint, each moment of observation, rewires the nervous system toward calm. The soul that was once reactive becomes composed. Seneca taught that tranquility does not mean the absence of pain, but freedom from its domination. To bear trials with a calm mind, he wrote, robs misfortune of its strength. This truth anticipates the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. Perception shapes emotion. If you change the lens, the world itself shifts color. Neuroscience confirms that reframing, the conscious reinterpretation of events, alters neural connectivity in the anterior cingulate cortex, reducing emotional distress. In essence, Stoic wisdom was an early form of neuroplasticity, philosophy as brain architecture. Yet serenity is not a numb state. It is full participation without turbulence. The Stoic stands in the storm but is not carried by it. When Epictetus was mocked for his poverty, he answered, "You may chain my leg, but not my will." His serenity was not passivity. It was defiance rooted in freedom. Neuroscientists would describe his composure as a shift from sympathetic arousal, the body's fight-or-flight response, to parasympathetic coherence, where heart rate slows and breathing deepens. The Stoic calls it virtue. The scientist calls it regulation. Both are the same phenomenon, power governed by awareness. Serenity also transforms perception of time. The reactive mind lives in anticipation or regret, constantly oscillating between what might come and what has passed. The serene mind resides in the present, the only place where reason can act. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the present moment is a small thing, yet the only thing we truly possess. Modern mindfulness practices echo this exactly. When the brain focuses on the now, neural noise decreases, and the default mode network quiets. The result is not emptiness but vividness, colors sharper, sensations deeper, thought more precise. The Stoic finds beauty in what is because he has stopped resisting what was and fearing what will be. This serenity radiates outward. The person who has conquered inner turbulence becomes an anchor for others still tossed by it. Emotional stability is contagious. Mirror neurons translate calm as safety. In a room of anxious people, one serene presence can recalibrate the atmosphere. The Stoics knew this without measuring brainwaves. They practiced serenity, not for themselves alone, but as service to humanity. A composed mind uplifts all minds it touches. This is why the emperor-philosopher, surrounded by wars and plague, could still write words that heal across centuries, because peace, once achieved within, becomes a transmissible force. To cultivate serenity is to reverse the hierarchy of the modern world. Today, people chase excitement, adrenaline, constant stimulation, yet mistake agitation for aliveness. The Stoic chases steadiness, knowing that excitement fades while composure endures. Serenity is a form of strength that cannot be faked. It's the quiet authority of one who has wrestled chaos and learned its language. Neuroscience would say this is homeostasis, the body's return to balance after stress. Philosophy would say it is wisdom, the soul's return to itself. You know you are nearing serenity when noise no longer dictates your attention, when conflict no longer hijacks your emotions, when silence no longer feels like emptiness, but like rest. You begin to realize that peace was never missing, only obscured by reaction. The mind, once turbulent, now mirrors the calm of a lake untouched by wind. Beneath it, everything is alive: thought, perception, emotion, but all in perfect rhythm. The Stoic mind is not free from the world, it is free within the world. Its peace does not depend on circumstance but on coherence. It feels pain yet does not amplify it. It feels joy yet does not cling to it. It is balanced, awake, alert, the union of acceptance and intention. Neuroscience calls this optimal functioning. Philosophy calls it virtue. You can call it serenity. You are no longer a slave to reaction. You have become the calm within chaos, the quiet mind that observes, chooses, and acts with grace. That is the summit of discipline, the gift of reason, and the reward of stillness. To move through storms without being moved by them. To become unshakable is not to become hard. It is to become supple, like tempered steel, capable of bending under pressure without breaking. Strength without flexibility is fragility disguised as confidence. The Stoic knew this. He did not aspire to be stone. He aspired to be a tree, deeply rooted, yet able to sway with the wind. True resilience is not rigidity, it's harmony between endurance and adaptability. And the bridge between the two is silence. In silence, the mind learns to absorb impact without losing balance. When Seneca wrote that, "A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials," he was describing neuroplasticity before the word existed. The brain, like the soul, strengthens through challenge. Each time you endure discomfort without collapse, new neural pathways form. The prefrontal cortex communicates more efficiently with the amygdala. Emotion and reason integrate. You begin to respond rather than react, adapt rather than resist. Neuroscience calls this resilience circuitry, the network that turns stress into growth instead of trauma. The Stoics simply called it virtue through practice. Resilience is a conversation between mind and body. The nervous system is an ancient guardian. It remembers every threat, every failure, every humiliation. When you face new adversity, the body recalls the old ones, anticipating pain. But through awareness, you can re-educate it. When you remain calm under tension, breathing evenly and thinking clearly, the body learns that struggle does not mean danger. The sympathetic system quiets. Parasympathetic regulation takes over. The same energy once used for defense becomes fuel for discipline. With each repetition, the baseline of composure rises. You become, quite literally, harder to shake. Marcus Aurelius lived this truth surrounded by chaos, war, disease, betrayal, yet wrote with serenity. His strength was not absence of hardship, but mastery of response. He saw adversity as the forge in which character is shaped. Modern psychology affirms this through post-traumatic growth, the phenomenon where adversity, when processed consciously, enhances meaning, gratitude, and purpose. What the philosopher framed as wisdom, the scientist measures as neurochemical balance. Stress hormones decline, dopamine stabilizes, and neural efficiency increases. Hardship becomes integration. To be unshakable is not to suppress emotion, but to understand it. Epictetus told his students, when something happens, remind yourself that it was bound to happen. He wasn't denying pain, he was redefining it. Acceptance transforms chaos into clarity. Neuroscience echoes this. When you name emotion, simply acknowledge it. Activity in the amygdala decreases, while the prefrontal cortex gains control. Awareness transforms feeling into data, and data can be managed. The Stoic and the scientist converge on this point. Observation changes everything. Every difficulty carries within it the potential for refinement. When you practice endurance with awareness, the brain learns that survival can coexist with serenity. Neural networks of fear weaken, those of confidence and patience grow. Resilience, then, is not toughness, it's trust. Trust that you can meet the moment without escaping it. The unshakable mind does not resist what is. It reorganizes itself around it. It bends, absorbs, and stands again. There's also a rhythm to resilience. Contraction and release, like breath. The Stoic trains through both. He endures tension, but also knows when to rest. Constant strain burns energy. Constant avoidance weakens resolve. Resilience lives in the balance, effort followed by restoration. Neuroscience shows that deliberate recovery, silence, sleep, contemplation, solidifies neural adaptation. What you learn during challenge becomes part of you during rest. That is why stillness is not the opposite of growth, but its completion. The gym of the mind includes quiet. Resilience is also an act of faith. Faith not in outcomes, but in capacity, in the ability to face whatever arises with presence. Cato, faced with Rome's corruption, refused to surrender his integrity. His resistance was not born of hatred, but of principle. He knew he could not control the empire, only his own posture within it. The modern world still tests us with its noise and pressure. But the lesson is unchanged. Your stability does not depend on the calm of your environment, but on the structure of your inner world. In neuroscience, this structure manifests as self-regulation. In philosophy, it manifests as virtue. Both describe the same architecture, systems aligned in harmony rather than reaction. The unshakable person is not immune to emotion. They are guided by it without being governed by it. They feel deeply, but remain steady. They act firmly, but without haste. They trust the process, knowing that storms cannot drown what is learned to breathe underwater. When the world shakes, the unshakable listen instead of panic. When insulted, they observe before responding. When they fall, they study the ground before standing again. Every experience becomes instruction, every failure a refinement. They are tempered by challenge, not defined by it. Their silence is not emptiness, it's density. The density of a mind that no longer disperses its strength in every direction, but gathers it inward like light into flame. And from that silence, a new voice emerges. Not the voice that argues or explains, but the voice that simply is, steady, calm, and whole. The world will still move, the winds will still change, but within you there will be something that does not, a core of still fire, a quiet certainty that cannot be taken, only shared. That is what it means to be unshakable, not untouched by life, but unchanged in essence by it. Power often disguises itself in volume, in dominance, argument, and assertion. Yet the paradox of true strength is that it rarely raises its voice. The quieter you are, the more power you hold. The less you explain, the more others listen. What appears as restraint is, in truth, command. This is the paradox of power. It does not need to be seen to be felt. Marcus Aurelius captured this perfectly when he wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one." In that sentence lies the secret: presence over persuasion, embodiment over proclamation. The modern world confuses noise for authority. We are surrounded by amplification, opinions broadcast, confidence performed, but the loudness of words is not the measure of their weight. Volume can fill a room, but only depth can move it. Stoicism teaches that virtue, when real, does not require advertisement. It radiates. Power that comes from alignment between mind, word, and action is not performative. It is gravitational. People feel it before they understand it. This is the power that does not compete because it does not depend. In neuroscience, power of this kind translates to coherence. When the nervous system is balanced, the prefrontal cortex, seat of decision and reason, synchronizes with the limbic system, seat of emotion. The result is a state of calm alertness. Your speech slows, your gestures stabilize, your presence anchors the environment around you. Others' mirror neurons align with that composure. You influence not by force, but by resonance. This is why true leaders often speak softly. Their power lies not in volume, but in vibration. The Stoics understood that real influence begins in self-control. "No man is free who is not master of himself," wrote Epictetus. Power directed outward, through anger, persuasion, or dominance, is unstable because it depends on response. Power directed inward, mastery of desire, fear, and impulse, is inexhaustible. The man who conquers his reactions has no rival, for he cannot be manipulated. This is the essence of sovereignty: to govern oneself so completely that no external circumstance can command your state of being. Jordan Peterson often speaks of the same principle from a psychological lens. He calls it the integration of the shadow, the process of acknowledging one's capacity for destruction but choosing discipline over indulgence. The Stoics called this temperance. Neuroscience describes it as balanced prefrontal limbic connectivity. All describe the same state, the union of strength and serenity, potential and control. Power is not the suppression of aggression, it is its direction. The lion does not roar to remind others it is a lion, it simply is. Power expressed through stillness has a different texture, one that disarms rather than threatens. The person who does not rush to defend or assert is assumed to know something others do not. Their calm becomes authority. This is not manipulation, it is biology. In social dynamics, uncertainty triggers anxiety, and the brain looks for the most stable signal to follow. The one who remains composed during chaos becomes that signal. Their silence sets the tempo. Others regulate themselves by it. In that quiet, power becomes invisible governance. This paradox of power can also be felt in nature. The ocean is vast, yet silent. The sun does not explain its warmth. Gravity never boasts of its pull. Their strength lies in consistency. They do not need to prove what they continually demonstrate. The Stoic seeks to live the same way, steady, ordered, radiating quiet confidence. Modern science calls this neural predictability. Systems that are stable and coherent emit less internal noise. The calmer you are, the more efficient your body becomes. Stillness is not absence of energy. It is energy under perfect control. Seneca warned that those who chase power through appearance become its slaves. He who is always on display, he wrote, has already surrendered his peace. The paradox is cruel but true. The pursuit of being seen often hides the fear of being invisible. But the mind rooted in stillness does not fear invisibility, because it knows that real impact does not require visibility. Influence that endures is influence that flows from character, not charisma. Neuroscience would say, authenticity engages the brain's reward system longer than impression does. The Stoic would say, virtue outlasts spectacle. When you finally stop explaining, something sacred happens. You begin to conserve your energy, and that energy becomes presence. Presence becomes gravity. Gravity becomes influence. Power ceases to be something you pursue and becomes something you emanate. You realize that stillness is not the opposite of force. It is its refinement. The loud exhausts itself, the quiet endures. The argument fades, the example remains. Power is not about dominance, but about depth. The depth of awareness, of intention, of restraint. It is the silence that fills a room because it needs no announcement. It's the look that steadies another person's chaos. It's the composure that ends an argument before it begins. When you understand this, you stop performing power and start embodying it. You learn that the quietest presence can carry the greatest force. And when you finally stop explaining, defending, or proving, something extraordinary occurs. People lean in. The noise recedes, the air changes. Because in that silence, something eternal is speaking. Not your voice, but your essence. Power no longer shouts, it simply is. There comes a point when words can no longer build you, only silence can. After all the striving, explaining, and defending, there is a return, a coming home to the self that needs no witness to exist. This is the empire within. It is not a fortress built of pride, but a sanctuary of order. Here, the noise of the world dissolves into insignificance. Here, you remember that what you sought to prove through argument, you were meant to be through alignment. Strength in stillness, power in discipline, wisdom in action. Silence is not the absence of sound. It is the presence of self. It is awareness unclouded by justification. It's where perception expands and reaction ends. The Stoics built their philosophy upon this inner empire, a domain no circumstance could invade. Marcus Aurelius ruled the greatest territory of his age, yet spent his nights writing not about conquests, but about the mind. He knew that empires built outward fall with time, but empires built inward outlast centuries. The territory of the self, disciplined, calm, and coherent, is the only one truly worth ruling. To rule this inner empire is to master the forces that once ruled you: fear, desire, opinion, noise. When those forces no longer command your mind, the external world loses its power to control your peace. This is not detachment from life, but dominion within it. Epictetus, born a slave, understood this better than most kings. He said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." His chains were physical. His mind was sovereign. Modern neuroscience confirms what he lived, that perception determines reality. The brain's sensory cortex does not distinguish between external and internal events. What it believes, it experiences. When you organize belief around virtue, life reorganizes around peace. In this empire of awareness, the mind becomes both architect and guardian. Every thought is a brick, every choice, a wall, every moment of restraint, a foundation stone. And just as no empire is built in a day, mastery of the self is the work of a lifetime. The Stoics saw discipline as daily construction, small acts of alignment repeated until they became character. Neuroscience names this process long-term potentiation, the strengthening of neural pathways through repetition. Each time you choose silence over reaction, patience over impulse, truth over comfort, you fortify the empire. Your neurons record the victory. Your nervous system begins to obey virtue by instinct. The world will still test your walls. Storms will come, rejection, chaos, temptation, loss. But the one who has built inwardly does not crumble. His peace is not circumstantial, it is structural. Seneca compared this to the fire that transforms what it touches. A fire tests gold, and adversity tests brave men. The flames that consume others only temper the stoic. Neuroscience might call it stress inoculation, controlled exposure that strengthens resilience. The Stoic calls it life. Within this empire, the currency is awareness. You spend it through attention, and where attention goes, energy flows. So you guard it carefully. You no longer waste it on arguments that drain your spirit or emotions that erode your clarity. You understand that power leaks through reaction, that peace dissolves in defense. Silence becomes not absence, but abundance, the preservation of strength for what truly matters. The still mind is not idle. It is in constant creation, shaping reality through intention rather than impulse. This is where the teachings of philosophy and neuroscience converge. The Stoics taught that a virtuous mind is one aligned with nature. Science reveals that coherence, the synchronization of brain, heart, and body, produces measurable harmony across systems. Both describe the same phenomenon: order within chaos. When your inner rhythms align, your decisions sharpen, your emotions stabilize, your presence deepens. You become a force of equilibrium in a disordered world. That is the empire within, the mind as a kingdom of coherence, the soul as its silent ruler. And so, as the noise of life returns, the voices, the demands, the endless rush, remember this: your power lies not in conquering it, but in remaining unmoved by it. The empire is not out there. It is behind your eyes, beneath your breath, between your thoughts. No one can enter it without your permission. No circumstance can overthrow it unless you yield. You have been building it all along. Every pause, every silence, every act of restraint has been a stone in its walls. Now, in the quiet that follows this realization, let the final truth settle. You were never meant to explain your strength. You were meant to embody it. You were never meant to chase peace. You were meant to become it. Because in a world of noise, your silence is not weakness. It is your empire. Strength in stillness, power in discipline, wisdom in action. And in that stillness, you reign.